Welcome to the Scrum.org Community Podcast, a podcast from the home of Scrum. In this podcast, we feature professional Scrum trainers and other Scrum practitioners sharing their stories and experiences to help learn from the experience of others. This episode is a previous recording of our live Ask a Professional Scrum Trainer series, where a live audience asks questions of professional Scrum trainers. We hope you enjoy this episode. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're located today. Welcome to today's Ask a Professional Scrum Trainer session. My name is Lindsay Valesina with Scrum.org. I will be moderating today, and our guest today is David Sabine. He is a professional Scrum trainer based in Canada. So welcome, David. So just a little bit about Scrum.org. We are the home of Scrum. We were founded by Ken Schwaber back in 2009. Our mission is to help people and teams solve complex problems, and we do so through our professional Scrum training and certification and lots of ongoing learning opportunities. You will notice on our website there are a lot of free learning opportunities within our learning paths and webinars and videos and that type of thing. So please feel free to check those out. I hope that today's session plays an important role in that continuing learning for you too. So with that, I will hand it over to David to briefly introduce himself, and then we will start diving into questions. So please start populating your questions.
Thank you, Lindsay. And hello, everyone. As you're entering the room, welcome. I hope that you'll ask lots of questions. I look forward to a good conversation here. Also, please use the chat for just ongoing comments and things so that I can see some feedback. And if you disagree with me or agree with me, let me know. But so as Lindsay said, I'm located in Canada, in London, Ontario, which is just about 2 hours outside of Toronto. My name is David Sabine. I've been a PST since 2018, and I'm also a Kanban trainer. I've been a Scrum trainer for many years, even prior to my involvement with Scrum.org. But I'm quite happy to be part of the Scrum.org PST community. It's just a wonderful group of people, intelligent, creative, and I'm honored to be part of that community. As you see on screen, I think it's interesting to highlight that my career has changed over the many years. It kind of highlights the intersection of business and technology and education. I've taught in college, and I've worked also as in tech for many, many years. I do have a technical background. I still write code regularly, but I work primarily as a trainer and or consultant and coach on contract with various enterprise clients. Please note that I have published a book recently. It's about the Canadian government's largest IT disaster. So it's the greatest catastrophe in IT history in the Canadian government. Please feel free to check that out. And so that's me. I hope for a good conversation. Back to you, Lindsay.
Right, sounds good. So I'm going to stop sharing here so that I can see everything. All right, so let's see. So this first question that came in from Scott: single PO, multiple products, 2 teams to support those products. Do you maintain a single backlog, thus prioritizing all the product's requirements in one place, or a single backlog per product, which is normal? And then somehow try to refine and maintain multiple backlogs of which all the teams are supporting.
Lindsay, did Scott say there's 2 teams?
Yes.
And 2 products?
Yes.
1 product owner. That's an interesting...
Multiple products.
Multiple products, thank you. So that's an interesting scenario. Scrum, in Scrum's design, if we look at Scrum's design, we would encourage 1 product owner, 1 backlog, 1 product, and then multiple teams that might service that backlog. But in your scenario, we need to maybe look at some basic principles that are compatible with Scrum. And so what came to mind as Lindsay was reading the question to me is that the teams really deserve and need a coherent and single input stream. And so with the two teams you have, hopefully what they see, okay, the interface they have with their product owner is a coherent stream of priorities. How
So
the
we got
product
to
owner
look,
populates.
just to interrupt you very briefly,
Yeah.
just to add a little more context.
Sure.
Scott commented back and said, this is because of budget cuts. So now we have fewer teams than products.
Yeah, I mean, the business will have various reasons, maybe budgetary or otherwise, for, there's always constraints on and there's always a mismatch of demand and capacity. How many people do we need? How many people, and how much work is there to do? So I appreciate knowing that there's budgetary constraint. So my suggestion won't be that you need to go and develop new teams, hire more people to service more of those products. What I really want to highlight is that you have a portfolio of products, and it's the challenge for this product owner is to slot in the needs of that portfolio in such a way that by the time that product backlog hits the teams, that they're seeing a prioritized stream of work, so that the teams aren't having to choose between which product to service, which priorities to highlight. It's not an ideal scenario, as you know, so that's the reason for your question. How else would I would want to evolve that scenario. Something you might try would be 2 backlogs, one for each team, one product owner that's sort of doing double duty. That might be an experiment worth trying. The challenge there might be that the product owner would lose track, let's say, of which products, which features, which tasks are being performed on each of the products. I don't know that let me know if what I'm saying is resonating for you, or if you have a follow-up question. But I think the principle is that you have a portfolio to deal with. So the product owner has to kind of slot in those priorities for that to meet the needs of the entire portfolio, and the teams deserve and need a coherent input stream. And I'll just leave it at that unless there's a follow-up question.
Okay, great. Thank you. Right. So this next question, I recently got the PSM1 cert, but have no professional experience as a Scrum Master. Other than double hatting my current job, what do you suggest to gain experience?
That's a great question. I to gain experience, you might volunteer. That's I've seen people do that. They get involved with perhaps conference organizing groups, organizing teams, or they go to conferences, meet people, see various ways that others have gotten involved and gathered experience. You can also, here's a second suggestion, look back through your work experience and really mine for experience that is related to Scrum. So maybe you weren't in a Scrum team, and maybe you weren't a Scrum Master, but if you were with a group that was trying parts of Scrum, maybe they were running a daily Scrum, maybe you were facilitating a planning meetings on a regular basis. There might be some of that experience in your history, and you could really capitalize on that and work on that. But another thing to consider is that the market for Scrum Masters is changing. I wrote an article a few years ago about the reality that, when I became a Scrum Master, it was really quite rare to meet someone in that role. And it was rare to find companies that even knew what a Scrum Master was. And so we kind of had to forge our own way. We were dealing with, the early adopters, and we were working with startups most of the time, young startups with sort of younger directors or founders who were on that cutting edge, and they were hearing about agile methods, and they were interested in that. And so there's a tip, okay? Look for startups that are just naturally without all of the bureaucracy of an enterprise. But we're also in the marketplace now dealing with not the early adopters, not even the early majority. I think we're in late majority adoption of Scrum throughout the world. And so this means that people who are hiring Scrum Masters, they expect that you have good knowledge of what they will call best practices. They will expect that there are some standard ways of applying Scrum's practices. They'll expect that there's some standard ways of managing the adoption of Scrum's practices if they're coming from a more conventional, not agile context. And so I think my advice is to look for startups to work with, volunteer with agile organizations such as conference organizing, meet people so you can develop a network so that you can find people who are looking for new Scrum Masters that are eager to learn. And then with enough experience, you'll be able to apply and look for opportunities within larger enterprises. And like I said, they'll be looking for people that have sort of knowledge of standard ways to adopt Scrum or apply its practices. Good luck. I don't know if that helps. Let me know give me a comment to let me know that I've touched on the aspects of the question that you wanted me to.
Thanks, David. Okay, so this next question, it looks like I'm going to try to read this correctly, and if I don't, please feel free to correct me in the chat. So one of the Scrum Masters in the release train is not listening and not bringing any changes in the team, even though we coach and have given enough training related to the Scrum Master role. How do we make this work?
I would love to ask all kinds of questions so that I understand the context more. But I know that I can't get feedback from you directly through conversation. So as I go, let me know in the chat if I'm missing or misunderstanding something. But it sounds to me like there's a potential that this Scrum Master that you're talking about is naturally insular, perhaps. They have some incentive or motivation to, what are they doing? Are they trying to keep things the same for their team? Are they trying to keep change out? Maybe they're not listening to the others about the change they think is necessary. That might be the case. Maybe that Scrum Master is working on improvements for their team, not taking the feedback from the others. So one of the questions might be, if they're not improving in the way you'd like to see them improve, or helping the team improve the way you'd like to see the team evolve, what are they doing? Has the team stagnated? This is a case where, if I were working in that environment, I'd be interested to find out if the team is having effective retrospectives, for example. I would look to find, what have they adapted or changed in their ways of working to improve their definition of done lately? What improvements are they working on? I'm just reading the chat here to make sure I might have touched on the question. Lindsay, can you let me know if there's an aspect of that question that perhaps I've missed or misunderstood?
Yeah, I mean, we don't have any comments that have come in related to that. So I think that,
What was the last part of the question? What would I do, or what would I
like,
advise?
what it says is, it says what your best option to make home work. I think there was like a typo or something in there. So how do you make the scenario? How do you fix the situation? I think is what I took from reading it.
It sounds to me
Anyway,
the situation, I'm making some assumptions here, but
okay.
it sounds like the situation is that we've got one Scrum Master and or their team um, unwilling to take feedback about what others want them to improve. This isn't a Scrum problem. I mean, Scrum might be part of the solution here to, like I said, to ensure that the team and the Scrum Master are having effective retrospectives. But maybe other Scrum Masters can work on some, cross silo dialogue. And at some point, you've got to kind of crack open that door and have a conversation with that Scrum Master to find out what's going on, and to ensure that there's a feedback loop so that that team is responsive to the needs of the larger organization. Thank you for the question.
Okay, great. All right. So this is kind of a fun question. So this comes from Alan. Any new trends or patterns that you've recently seen in Scrum that's made you scratch your head and think, oh wow, that's interesting and different?
Um, yeah,
Not
actually.
putting you on the spot or anything.
Well, I might be one of the rare few who like there's a change in the way Scrum has been described in the recent Scrum guide. Of course, we've modified the language so that we're talking about accountabilities instead of talking about roles. This is a recent development, and I'm interested to see how this plays out. Because on one hand, for example, we say that a product owner is a single individual with authority regarding the sequence and content of the product backlog. The Scrum Master, we often talk about as a single individual. The developers are a plural. But when we change that language, so we're not talking about role, we're talking about accountability, it becomes easier, I think, for people to imagine that product ownership is a competency required by the team. And maybe that can be a collective effort. I don't know. I mean, I don't agree that it's a collective effort. I still very much feel that the role of product owner is best served by an individual. But this is, to your question, this is something I find interesting and a kind of recent development. I'd love to hear your own thoughts. I mean, if I could, I would ask you the same question.
Yeah,
So maybe pop it in the question here.
feel free to add that into the chat. If anyone has anything they want to share. All right. Okay. So this question from Steven, how do you best handle test cycles? Test product, create bug reports, fix bugs, retest.
Stop producing bugs. And I'm not just being facetious. I'm meaning that there are some common techniques, like a bug immediately goes to the top of the product backlog, perhaps. Okay, I'm not saying that that's a rule of Scrum. I'm saying that that's a working agreement that I think every team ought to consider, so that when a defect is identified, it's the very next thing that the team solves. That kind of practice, and I've worked in environments like that where quality is high and we've been able to keep quality high. Now, if you're talking about an environment where quality is low and there are many such defects and glitches and bugs and problems, quality problems to deal with, that requires obviously a different strategy. or not. Maybe you take all of those and put them at the top of the backlog, and that could be a working agreement to consider. But more likely, the case is that you have quality problems that you need to resolve over time. And so every sprint, some capacity ought to be dedicated to addressing those quality problems. I think those are the basic principles. Some of the pitfalls I would watch for, though, would be if people are, particularly managers, if they're spending a lot of effort to, document those defects, prioritize them, estimate them, oh my gosh, that's an anti-pattern I would encourage that be stopped. There's very little benefit that comes out of that, because it's a lot of effort. Estimates are impossible in that regard, and it might be better to establish a different working agreement. Like I said earlier, maybe some amount of capacity within the team or teams. Every sprint is dedicated to paying down those quality problems, or just prioritize them at the top of the backlog. But I wonder if I've missed part of the question. How do you handle test cycles? Let's come back to it. If I missed part of the question, please ask another so I can be more clear.
Yeah, the main
Back to you, Lindsay.
question was the how to best handle test cycles, and then in parentheses it was test product, create bug reports, fix bugs, retest as examples.
Well, there's another aspect of the question I think is interesting, and that is within every sprint, as functionality is being created, as product backlog is being turned into functionality, I would expect that that's being tested within the sprint. That's being tested immediately. Automated tests as much as required, on unit level or integration level or even UI level. But if there are manual tests being performed, I would worry that if you're in an environment where the manual tests are happening segregated in time, okay, maybe it's not happening within the sprint where that functionality is being developed, but it's happening some time later. I would worry that there's, that let's just say that the further you stretch that time, the harder it is to manage and see the tests and the results of those tests, and to provide like that feedback loop to the development work. So to manage that, I would suggest that the time be in close proximity, the people be in close proximity, so that testers and others are working together within the team and within the sprint.
All right, great.
Interesting
Thank
question.
you, David. Yeah. So I typically like to take these questions and kind of group them together, but this is really like a potpourri of questions that we have today. So we're going to kind of jump around different topics. So sure. This next question from Mark, Mark is from the UK. How do you overcome the bureaucracy of the public sector? Agile and Scrum is supposed to be speedy. However, there are policies and processes within local government that often slows things down. Have you seen anything that you can kind of share some thoughts here?
Well, I'll plug my book. So my book is entirely about government bureaucracy and how it gets in the way of development. So to Mark's question, I think the bureaucracy is in let's say the hardest part is the bureaucracy, but the bureaucracy is created by often the treasury. Okay, so in the public sector, how a government releases funding will define to a large degree how the development organization is organized, and the constraints that the development organization will face. And what I mean by that is that here in Canada, the Treasury Department, the Treasury Board of the federal government, or even all of the provincial governments, they release funding in terms of these phase gates, okay? And actually, Canada's federal government has a document where they define the phase gates, and they actually say that, we organize IT projects based on the traditional waterfall. They actually say that out loud, and which annoys me to some degree, because there's nothing traditional about it. Like, let's be clear, this is a fiscal habit that's adopted, from very old thinking about how, when computers were the size of a truck, and to change the architecture caused people to have to fabricate entirely new circuit boards and rewire everything. I mean, that's where the conventional waterfall was created, because people thought we needed, and there was some sense in having to separate design from later development. But the treasury boards in our governments still operate on those same assumptions. They operate thinking that design work needs to be fundamentally separate from development work, and they won't release funding to the development teams until a whole bunch of upstream planning documents have been assigned and approved. There is no easy answer to Mark's question. It might just simply mean that Scrum will remain elusive in those environments that are heavily bureaucratic. And by that, I mean that you'll be able to apply parts of Scrum, like the daily Scrum, or maybe frequent demos, okay? But until the treasuries figure out new ways to govern the funding, I think we're stuck with it.
Okay. Thank you, David. All right. So just a little announcement for everyone who is asking questions. Thank you so much for asking them.
Lindsay, just let me interrupt briefly. I see a lot of questions showing up in the chat.
That's what I'm going to address right now. So I am going to ask anyone who is asking questions in the chat to please move them over to the Q&A at the bottom of your screen so that they are captured. We are going to try to get through as many of these questions as we can today, but if there are questions in the chat that we don't get to, we will not capture them at the end of this session for David to address offline. So please, if you did ask questions into the Q&A, I've been replying to some of them to please take your questions and add them to the Q&A, but please add them there so that we capture all of the questions so we can make sure that they are all addressed if we do not have time in today's session. But yeah, you were reading my mind, David. But thank you, everyone. I appreciate the enthusiasm with all of the questions for sure. All right, so this next question is a Scrum Master NPO type of question. So I am leading the Scrum team, playing the Scrum Master role. So big question there is, are you the Scrum Master or are you just playing the role? The PO is not sharing the roadmap with his team. How can we make him share the roadmap with the team? I asked multiple times, but the PO is not ready to share. What is your point of view to make him share the roadmap?
Wow. Yeah. So this is interesting. I mean, so in this case, your so-called PO is, it might be that they don't have a mechanism to share the roadmap. I honestly can't think of a reason why a product owner or anyone in a product management role would not communicate the roadmap to the team, unless the roadmap is fundamentally in question, okay, that they might not yet have made decision about the sequence of releasing or the timelines, or that they intend, or it might be that other decision makers are still debating a lot of the options. There might be lots of open questions, and it might be that your PO is reluctant to share the current roadmap with the team because maybe they believe that roadmap is false and it's likely to be fundamentally changed. But you've already asked multiple times, I don't know how to solve this for you other than ask a different way, perhaps. Like if you've tried, you have to communicate with that PO the importance of understanding the roadmap and find new ways to ask them for that information. Good luck. Wow, that's a little bizarre and interesting.
Oh. All right. This next question. My question is about releases. Is it a normal scenario if we make a release, even if the sprint isn't finished yet? Sometimes stakeholders ask our dev team to make releases in a shorter period. What's your advice on that?
My advice is different depending on let's say the technical sophistication of the team. So if I look at a team that's quite sophisticated, what I mean by that is that they are capable of releasing new code into production environments multiple times a day. It's well tested, automated deployment flows, and high levels of let's say a high maturity of continuous integration and continuous development with appropriate tooling and testing. In that scenario, the concept of deploying can be separate from releasing. And what I mean by that is I would expect the team might be deploying multiple times a day as they're developing new code, as they're working through the sprint backlog, they're pushing code. And then when they might even be releasing it. I've worked with teams who are capable of releasing partial functionality to a subset of IP addresses or 5% of the users so that they can start getting feedback. And then what they do is they bring that feedback to the sprint review and they say to the product owners and stakeholders, they can say, we've pushed, this feature to, this part of the world, and it's reliable, it's not degrading our performance, we're getting some good feedback from users, we're not seeing a spike in customer service calls, and that can be the conversation that they're having in the sprint review, and then the product owner and stakeholders have the ability to decide release globally, like go for it, yeah, we're comfortable with this quality, go ahead and release it. In a team where they're less sophisticated, they don't have that pattern of continuous integration, they're not able to release multiple times a day or multiple times a week. It might be that you've got stakeholders here that are reacting to a situation of, well, they're reacting to quality problems, or they have, let's say, high priority requirements that they want expedited, and hey team, can you quickly push this out into the production? If that's the case, let's lean on Scrum to help those stakeholders understand that every sprint is an opportunity to inject some new requirement or change, but within the sprint we want to keep the goal protected from that sort of chaos. So my advice on that, to your question, if I can just close this up, my advice is, if scenario A is your real world, then I think it's quite healthy. If scenario B is your real world and you're dealing with stakeholders that are trying to inject things mid-sprint because they're reacting to quality problems or urgent things that they think need to be expedited, my advice there is to really lean on Scrum, help the stakeholders understand that a sprint goal, that there's value and there's benefit in protecting the sprint goal from that kind of chaos. Good luck with it.
Thank you. Right. So this next question from Joanne. I have a globally dispersed team who speak pretty good English. I just can't get them to engage in the sprint retrospective. They won't post topics on boards. They won't fill in a very short anonymous team questionnaire. We get the same voices who fill the silence. They don't dominate. Any suggestions? we start with the fun icebreaker, but what more can we do here to get a bit more joining in?
Yeah, I've seen this as well. I've experienced this. In my case, in the context that comes to my memory, it was that there was a corporate culture. So we were working with a vendor in Trivandrum, and the corporate culture of that company was that the managers would speak to their North American counterparts, and the others were like, there was a kind of silent understanding that the others should let the managers do that liaise, have that dialogue. And we didn't, let's see, we didn't solve it with icebreakers or games like innovation games, or we solved it by, I think, talking with the managers and just letting them know that we were very interested to hear all of the voices on the team, that we wanted to get to know all of the team members more personally. And we did learn, by the way, that English as a second language wasn't really they weren't nervous about that. They were interested and willing to speak, but again, we were dealing with a corporate culture, and we broke through that just simply by expressing to the senior members that we were really interested to, like, learn more about everybody and have a relationship, that we wanted it to be more informal. And once they understood that, we started to get a totally different kind of engagement from everyone. It's I think what I'm telling you to your question is that you need to think carefully about the corporate culture in those dispersed teams, and then try to unpack that somehow. I mean, good luck with that. It's a great problem to solve if you can solve it.
Hey, that's great advice. Thank you. Yeah, sometimes when you go a little more informal with those things, people are a little bit more comfortable.
Yeah.
All right. So this next question here, suppose that you have a team member who is falling behind on their tasks. You can see on the sprint board that they have more tasks open that are not being completed. What would you say is a good approach to the problem that demonstrates an agile mindset?
Yeah, this is a great question. I want to tell a brief story about two teams
Great.
that I worked with quite well in 2013, 2014. It was the same problem in both teams, and then two completely different solutions. So in one team, and this was not my, I wasn't in this team, but I had great friends in that team. I knew what was happening. And over the course of a number of sprints, there was a member of the team that wasn't, as your question implies, they weren't getting their tasks completed. Nearing the end of the sprint, everyone else in the team would have to pull long hours and heroic hours over the weekend to get things over the finish line. And then at the retrospective, they would bring that up and they'd say, hey, is there some way we can help you? We noticed that the last few days of the sprint, we all pitched in and had to get some of that work done. Is there some way we can help? And the team member said, no, don't worry, I got it. I'll be better next sprint. And well, the pattern continued, sprint after sprint. About 2.5 months passed, and it got to the point where in one of the retrospectives, a kind of outspoken member of the team just looked across the table and said, I don't trust you. We want to help, but you're not letting us know how can we help you. But this pattern has continued, and it's causing all of us a lot of stress. Now, what in that case, it was an interesting problem, because it was just that one developer was really super interested in data visualization, like algorithms and math, and he just wasn't engaged in the big Drupal corporate websites that the team was building. And so it was a motivational problem. And what was decided in that sprint retrospective was that all the team members decided, we're going to help you get a new job. We're all going to write reference letters and reach out to our network and get you a job doing what you love, which is data analysis and data visualization. But you can't stay in the team. Okay, so he was simultaneously fired, and the Scrum Master walked him down the hallway and went into the HR office. It was a small startup company, so we had this direct sort of interaction. Went to the HR office and said, hey, we need to get the paperwork started. We're all going to help him get a new job. Now, in the other team, and by the way, that worked out great. He is loving his work, and he's been thriving now for about 8 years in a new role, doing some amazing stuff. So it all worked out well. In the other team, similar problem. The same pattern was happening. At the end of the sprint, there was one developer not getting their tasks complete, and everyone else would have to get the work done, or they felt like they had to pitch in and get things done. And this pattern continued. And what was happening in this team, this was my team, this developer had moved across the country from Toronto to Vancouver, and the move was actually very difficult on his relationship with his wife, and they were struggling. So we didn't know this, of course, and so the retrospective, the same kind of pattern. We'd ask, like, is there some way we can help you? We want to make sure that the work of the sprint is getting done, and we're not having to pull these long hours over the weekend. And no, I got it. It'll be better next sprint, and so on. And this pattern continued. Now, what happened was we flew him into Toronto. There was a pattern in the company where every 3 months, everyone would come to Toronto, and we would be together for a week or 2 weeks. And now he was in Toronto, and the next retrospective, we were all in person. And this was really important to my story, because now people were engaging with him again, going for meals and going out in the evening for a movie, or just having friendly conversation. So this retrospective was now different, and he was comfortable to tell us. It's like, it's been really tough, he said, for my wife and I ever since we moved. And so our conversation changed from, like, how can we help you, to how can we help you? So the team's decision here was, rather than fire him and help him get a new job, we told him, like, take all the time you need.
Yeah, that's really
so I hope
good
that
advice.
helps to the question.
Yeah, that's great advice. You never know what's going on. All right. So this next question here. So
By the way, to Scott's comment, I'm just reading Scott's comment
Okay.
here. Team members don't have tasks, teams have tasks, so no single person gets behind, the team gets behind. Yeah, agreed. So that was the culture in these teams I'm talking about, where, but also, Scott, we have to recognize that there are times when a team member picks an item from the sprint backlog and they say, hey, I got this one. Okay. And then everyone else takes them at their word, and there's a minimum ethic where we do as we said we'd do. And so if that team member said, I'll do this one, then they got it, right? But then when it obviously isn't getting done and there's a problem, others are going to rally around that and help that person out, if that person asks for help. What if that person doesn't ask for help? Does it mean the team lets that piece of work fail? No, it usually means people will somehow take it over. Hey, you said you got this, but clearly you need help, we got this. So the team would take it back from that. So I really appreciate your comment, Scott. And I think I'm telling you that at least from your brief comment, I'm aligned with your thinking. And there's a lot of nuance there as well that I'm sure you can relate to. Sorry, Lindsay, go ahead.
No worries. Thank you. Okay, so this next question here. So we are working on a project that has grown and in which the Scrum team contains more than 10 people and is likely to continue to grow. What do you suggest can be done in this situation?
That's a great question. I would watch for how the team members congregate. So when I mean by that is, as a team gets larger, they often subdivide. They'll subdivide sometimes naturally into little units that can get things done. That's healthy. And so as they subdivide, you might realize that they're actually behaving as multiple teams, and you can just appreciate that as an explicit working agreement. It's like, hey, now we're multiple teams. You can just make real in everyone's understanding what is already true in the real world. But there are other cases where as the team grows, they'll subdivide by skill, perhaps. They'll start to segregate. So developers over here, designers over there. That's a very common one. In those cases, I would watch to make sure that there's still a lot of cross-function and that they're that they're not introducing like a relay race, the baton passing from one group to the other, because now they're not behaving as teams. They're starting to split into functional groups. That's more problematic, also very natural, but I would just watch for that pitfall as the team gets larger. Either way, at some point, if the team continues to grow, you're going to it's just inevitable that you'll start breaking into team units. You just want those team units to be cross-functional and each serving the same product backlog if possible. Good question.
Great, thank you. So David, I don't know if we only have about 10 minutes or so left. So are there any questions that you see in the Q&A that you're just jumping at the bit to answer? Do you want to take a moment and see if there's anything in particular that you really want to address? I know you want to address them all, but
I'll go from the top, but we'll go really quickly. So first one here I see from Carl. Greetings from Germany, especially in the beginning of the process of optimization. What is a pattern you use in the beginning to get the company which hired you to follow your steps? Thanks. In the process of optimization, Carl, I would highly recommend that people look to the improvement kata pattern. Check that out online. I'll put it in the chat here. I think it's a great way for people to visualize how to get from current condition to a future desired state. And you don't have to have people follow your steps. You can decide what is the next step. You can decide together, and then people are often able to rally around that. So there's a quick advice. Check out the improvement kata. I'm going to go to Nancy's question. Bring out COP and also Scrum of Scrums to address this current question. Okay, that must have been in relation to some other comment or question that we were discussing.
yes.
Anonymous attendee, can you suggest practical tips on how to make teams available capacity for the sprint and determine the realistic story points to slot in a sprint? Are there any templates, reports to do this kind of analysis for capacity planning during sprint planning? Sorry if I've read that out too quickly, but
I'll drop it in the chat as well.
Thank you, Lindsay. So in this question, I would really look to the Professional Scrum with Kanban material or the Pro Kanban material to help. Like whenever there's a question around capacity and demand, and how much work can the team accomplish within a sprint. I want to look at actionable metrics, and some of the best material for that is out of the Kanban community, cycle time, work in progress limits, cumulative flow diagrams, these kinds of things. But even before we get to that point of complexity, let's look at a practical, like a very simple first principle. If a team doesn't know how much work they can achieve in a period of time, then maybe they just need to take the smallest number of items, maybe one item from the product backlog, and get it started and all the way to done. There's a principle here that we can apply, and that is that Scrum teams that finish early accelerate the fastest. This is some research that for which Jeff Sutherland has a lot of data. But what we mean by that is that if a Scrum team takes a conservative estimate about their sprint capacity, and they actually plan for having spare time within the sprint, like we're going to take in less work than we believe we can accomplish. That's like, there's no harm in doing that. There's like, what's the worst that can happen? Well, they can finish early. And if they do, well, we can be reasonably assured that their quality is high, their definition of done was achieved, and we can be assured that the team will do good things with their spare time. Maybe they'll take a little bit more from the product backlog. Maybe they'll do some other experimentation and research, or cross-training, or other learning. So that's my practical tip. Rather than try to stuff the sprint with exact number of predictable story points, just encourage the team to take a small conservative forecast for their sprint and get it all the way to done. Plan for having some slack within the sprint if possible. Lindsay, how am I doing? I'm not going very fast through these questions. So
that's okay. That's all right. We're going to share all these with you anyway.
Sure.
When we're done. So we do have time for maybe two more.
Okay, yeah, let's carry on.
So let's see. A lot of these are really in-depth questions. We already addressed some of these.
Oh, Ira Martinez asks how to handle constant changes in sprint review dates and a lack of visibility into the product backlog for planning sprints. It sounds like in this context, you don't have widespread commitment about sprint reviews. I would talk to the attendees, the invitees. Who do you invite to that sprint review? I would go and talk with a few of them and say, why is it that we're getting constant changes? Is it that some senior decision makers are, their calendars are busy, and so the sprint review gets shuffled around to accommodate their schedule? If that's the case, perhaps they need to understand how much chaos that's causing everyone else, if it is causing chaos. But I can imagine it is. You've got teams of people that are always having to scramble a bit to accommodate somebody else's calendar. If that's the reason for the constant change, I think the solution there is conversation. Ask for commitment to a routine. Okay, that's why in Scrum's design, the sprint review would happen in a consistent time and place every sprint. The other part of the question about lack of visibility into the product backlog, that's a whole other thing. I'll maybe answer that in writing after the fact. So let's move to another question, Lindsay.
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you. Sorry for taking a moment to read before. We had a little bit of dead air. So
that's okay.
This question
I know you're filtering.
This question from Pauline, from your experience or from others in the call, so you can add your thoughts here into the chat. What types of working agreements have delivered greater value to teams?
Good question. Please answer, Pauline, in the chat as well. Give your own perspective. My answer is a quick one. The working agreements that are of greatest benefit are the ones that the team can keep. As a Scrum Master, and I know that's kind of a non-answer to Pauline's question, but it does highlight the unique role that a Scrum Master can play in any work environment. Help people achieve working agreements and then help them abide by their own agreements. And so I don't have an opinion about which agreements are more effective than others. I think that's very highly contextual. It depends on the environment, depends on the corporate culture. But yeah, I'll just leave it at that. The best working agreements are the ones that the team can actually keep.
Okay, great. Thank you. All right. So we have one more question that will be a relatively quick one, and then we'll have to wrap up. But
Yeah, sure.
It made me chuckle a little bit. So it's a good question. So what this person must have heard this and isn't aware of what it is. So what is the sandwich approach for delivering bad news? Any specific example from your experience? So the sandwich approach, from what I understand, is, you say something good and then you give the bad news and then you say something good. So any thoughts there to close us off?
I love that analogy, metaphor. What's the word? Analogy. The sandwich approach. There's another one I like, which is to talk with people about what's positive, like what's glowing, and where can we grow. So glows and grows. So you can talk with people about things that are going really well, complimentary, positive, and rather than frame failure as failure, you can frame, or not failure, but so much as shortcomings. You can frame shortcomings as opportunities to grow or learn. I don't have any examples of myself using the sandwich approach, but that's kind of funny.
All right. Thank you for asking that, Mercy. All right. So we do have a number of questions that are open. I am going to share those with David, and we'll figure out how to address those in another format. Thank you all so much for these great questions. This was a really good batch of questions that came in today, and we really appreciate that. And I'm so glad you all were able to take advantage of David's time here today. So just really quick to wrap us up, feel free to check out the learning paths on the Scrum.org website. Those are free and available to you and at any time. So it's a great way to continue your learning, and they're all matched up to the different accountabilities. And stay connected with us through social media and through webcasts like this one. We run the Ask a PST session typically once a month. And we also have Scrum Pulse sessions as well. And keep an eye out on the Scrum.org community podcast too. There will be another episode with David featuring him coming up in the coming weeks as well, where you get to know David a little bit more. It's kind of a PST spotlight that we do. And with that, thank you so much, David, for taking the time today to help our audience out. And thank you, audience.
Thank you. Yeah, it's been great to be here. I hope everyone found something valuable in our conversation.
All right. Take care, everyone, and Scrum on.